So so that's well, I mean, I think everybody understands like what a middleman is, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes middlemen are useful. Sometimes middlemen, like, they want you to think that they're useful, but
right.
really, they're just there for various reasons, and they're able to like tax you like that troll under the bridge that makes you pay a tax before you cross the bridge. But let's get into this like middleman tax, right? Like,
Yeah,
give us some examples like in everyday life, right? How like a middleman will basically tax you for their services.
definitely. So, like, to go back to sort of this intermediary definition, I think the easiest example is to always point to like a commercial bank. I think the
Mm,
commercial bank is like the biggest middleman that we sort of have in our society, if you will.
yeah,
And so, when you think about sort of the implications or the taxes that come with that, I mean, they're the obvious ones, right? Like the actual taxes and fees, or better yet, the fees for using their service. But then there are the ones that are more implicit, right? So like then you've got the fact that they're earning money on top of your money and basically risking your funds to do it. Then
yeah,
then there's like what I'm now calling sort of like the data tax, right? It's a non-financial tax, but it
Mhm.
basically means that they get to take all of your data and then not only expose it to potential risk, but also like sell it off to other people who are going to use it against you, in the future, ultimately to get more money out of you, right? So that's why I look at that like as a tax in itself,
So
as well.
on that point though, that
Yeah,
takes me back to my Electo days, how like the banks would basically sell your financial data to the electric company in your area, or the phone company in your area. And a lot of people don't realize this, but like sometimes, if you, let's just say you paid your phone bill late or something like that, your Visa credit card interest rate would go up, even though you might have paid that one time all the time. But the fact that you paid, some other thing late, and the bank knows that, and they sold that data, to the credit card company. The credit card's like, oh, I can use this to make more money off this person through higher interest rates. Like, the whole thing is like incestuous.
yeah,
But
for real,
but yeah,
for
yeah,
real. And I'll say this, man, like, I don't, while I'm clearly a champion of a disintermediated financial system, honestly, I'm a champion of like the disintermediation of everything. But um, that to me, that doesn't mean that there is no use for a middleman, right?
yeah,
Or at least some sort of like quasi middleman service,
of
right?
course, yeah,
I think the problem that we have happened to sort of run into at this particular time in history is what happens when middlemen become too big and they become
yeah,
overly centralized, right? Because
yeah,
then there's a social tax on top of that, which
right,
effectively it is now, as we see. I think even the general American who probably doesn't have a lot of awareness of lobbying and sort of what goes on behind the political scenes will still be able to tell you that big money influences politics,
oh
right?
yeah,
Which then,
yeah,
which then, of course, influences all other aspects of society. And it's like, again, it's not that a middleman in and of itself, uh, uh, by definition, does that, but it's that once a middleman becomes like the middleman for everybody, right, within a given community, they now have like they have everybody's purse strings,
they
quite
they got
literally.
a monopoly. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
what you're going into is like the whole thing about market power and market dominance, right? And
Yeah,
like, to take it to the streets, like big bank take little bank, right?
right.
Like, it don't matter what you want or what you feel, right? As long as there's that market power, like they're gonna bully their way through whatever, and that's just how it is. There's a couple other examples that people might be familiar with in terms of like an intermediary, right? And again, it's not that intermediaries are all bad. It's just that when they do achieve market dominance and power, they're able to extract more and more tax. But if you think about it, what does Airbnb do? There are people who own properties, right? And there are people who want to visit somewhere and stay at a nice property. And these people want to do commerce with one another. So if you're staying in California and I'm in DC, and I come to Cali, and I want to rent your place and you want to rent me your place, we should be able to do that. Right now, Airbnb facilitates that, but Airbnb is going to charge you money, and that is going to impact what you charge me, right? Which means I'm going to pay more. They're basically extracting a tax. Now, Airbnb does not own any property. Air, they facilitate, right? They're a facilitator. And so like, what is the appropriate fee for facilitating that transaction? The same thing with Uber, right? If you're driving a car and you want to give people rides, and I happen to be somewhere in the city and it's raining and I want to ride, right? Like, we would like to be able to exchange, right? Like to be able to purchase the services that you're offering at that time, and Uber facilitates that. Before Uber, like, we were just stuck with the taxi, cabs or whatever. Uber facilitates that. So then the question becomes like, well, how much value is it right for Uber to extract from that transaction? Like, what is the appropriate compensation for them facilitating that? And we can get into that. But I think that kind of covers, sort of what intermediation is, right? Like, Uber's an intermediary, Airbnb is an intermediary, and the banks are intermediaries as well, right? As well as the credit card companies. And speaking of credit card companies, right, I think a lot of people, when you swipe your Visa card or your MasterCard, for you, you're just making a payment. But on the merchant side, the merchant's paying 30 cents plus 30% of whatever the transaction is, right? And I think American Express charges even more. So what happens is that the merchant, they actually increase their prices for what you pay as a consumer to compensate for the fees that they have to pay for credit cards. And if anybody's gone to like a local deli, you know what I mean? They're like, no credit card transactions under $5. That's because they're paying that tax. Like, they're not going to pay like that high tax on like, some $1 transaction. So you got to keep that in mind. I think the most notorious sort of like, tax that the middleman, charges is, and it was a big deal a while back, but like them overdraft fees. You hear people like paying like, $500 in overdraft fees because of like, one bounce check at Domino's Pizza or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy.
Right.
But anyway, let's move on. So we've defined I'm sorry, we've defined internet.